Now, I will talk about infrastructure on the map, both from historical perspective and from perspective of gameplay. I will basically say why the things that are present on the map are there, and then I will just briefly talk about what changes I made compared to the historical state of things and what I decided to keep despite it not being that great for gameplay. And I will start with railways. On the map, there are two railway lines. There is a northbound one that goes from Mastník, roughly in the center of the bottom border. It continues north to Čechočovice, then turns northwest, goes around Hvězdoňovice, goes through Okřížky railway station, around Přibyslavice, and then it descends to river level and continues north along the river all the way to Rosseč, where it crosses into the NATO territory, which of course still would be Czechoslovakia in real world. The second line is westbound one, and it starts on the eastern border at Vladislav and goes in the western direction through Třebíč city. It continues to the west until it gets to the south of Okřížky, where it rejoins the original line and ends at Okřížky railway station. Now, historically, especially the northbound route has quite an interesting history behind it. It was opened in 1871, which, as regards Austrian track building, is relatively early. And the question that needs to be asked is why was a railway connection to such an unimportant region built as early? And the answer obviously is that it had nothing to do with the region. It was part of a larger railway project that intended to shorten the distance between Vienna and Berlin. At the time, in 1860s, if you wanted to go to Berlin from Vienna, then you would have to go through north to Brno and then continue north, but then turn to the west to Kolín and to Pardubice, and then continue through Kolín and Prague, then turn northwest to go to Dresden, and then turn around and go northeast until you reach Berlin. So they decided to build a track that would go into the Berlin direction pretty much from the start. And the northbound route on the map is a part of this larger railway project, which also explains some intricacies about this line, in particular the existence of Stařeč station. If you look at Stařeč station, you can see a fairly large railway station. It has 4 tracks, quite a lot of buildings, but it's in the middle of nowhere. There are Čechočovice and there is Stařeč, but they are not really big settlements. So why is it there? Well, the reason is that in 1870s, this was the only line that you had, and this was the point that was closest to Třebíč. So they just built a station in the middle of nowhere, so people from Třebíč could just load their goods onto horse carriages and go through Stařeč to the Stařeč station and load the goods or persons onto the train and ship them off anywhere in the monarchy. The other line was opened 16 years later in 1887, and although on the map it starts at Vladislav, its important lies in it connecting Třebíč and Okřížky, the northbound line, with Brno. Brno at the time was a capital of Moravia. Today it's the second largest city in the Czech Republic. So this line went directly through Třebíč, so Třebíč finally received its own railway connection and its railway station. At the time, of course, it was on the edge of the city, but since then the city grew. So now it's pretty much in the middle of the city. Then they had to cross the Libuše Valley, which they did with a pretty tall bridge, which in 1960s, when this map is set, would still be the old Austrian bridge. It was renovated in the 1990s, but in 1960s the bridge would still be of Austrian construction. And these two lines, as I said, then meet at Okřížky. And if you look at Okřížky railway station and then look at the size of Okřížky, which is sort of a larger village, smaller town, you need to ask yourself why the station is so gigantic. And there are two parts to that question. The first is, of course, that it is where the northbound and the westbound lines meet, so there would be a lot of changing trains and also a lot of handling of the goods and reloading from one train to another. But that is not the whole answer. The rest of the answer lies in the way railway was operated in Austria. In Austria, until 1908, there were no single national railways. You had private operators who operated their own pieces of railway, and of course they were bound by concessions from the state, which means that the state, they could only do what the state allowed them to do, but within the limits of the concessions, they could do basically whatever they wanted, and there was a lot of competition between various railway operators. And the operator who operated the northbound line, and now I apologize if I butcher the pronunciation because I don't speak German that much, the operator who operated the northbound line was called Österreichische Nordwestbahn, which translates roughly as Austrian Northwest Railways. And they originally built this section of the railway station. They had headquarters in this small house, which is a pub at present day and in the 1960s. But once the westbound line was built, they needed to come to an agreement in regards to sharing the railway station with the other operator, who had much longer name. It was called Kaiserliche Königliche Privilegierte Österreichische Staatseisenbahngesellschaft, which translates as Imperial Royal Privileged Austrian State Railway Company. Despite the name, there was nothing state about the company. They just kept rolling with the name they have, because their history dates back to 1850s, when it actually was state-owned, but then it was sold to French investors. So despite it having state in the name, it was not state at all. And these two companies, they didn't come to an agreement regarding the railway station. So the state railway company, they pretty much just built a new station south of the old station and continued operating it. In 1908, of course, none of this mattered, because all these companies were merged into one Austrian state railways. But the reason for the layout is that it's actually not one railway station, but two. Okřížky is meant as a starting point in the map. It's a railway hub, it's probably the best connected point at the map, so it also has a construction office, and it has easy access to goods and to transportation of these goods. There is also a railway depot, and since this is a populated map, there are some basic trains that the player can use. The other place that is important for gameplay is the mentioned station at Sewage, which I turned into a seat of the rail construction office. So there is a rail construction office, there is a bus station that can be used to bring the workers in, and there are some storages with material that is needed for the rail construction office. Apart from that, lastly, there is a really small storage area in Brandshausen that can be used when sorting the goods to export to the NATO countries. Now, what did I change? Well, basically, I wanted, of course, to stay as authentic as I could, but in the end I decided not to frustrate the player too much, and this can be shown on 2 points or 2 things. Firstly, I decided to use the railways with concrete sleepers. Despite the railway, in the 1960s it would all be on wooden sleepers, but it would just slow the trains. The rebuilding of it would be really tedious, so I just decided to go with concrete sleepers. And the second part is that the line, basically apart from the stations, all the line would be single tracked only. While it may work in real life, of course the game sort of longens the distances, so it would not really be practical. So I included some segments of a track which are double tracked, so the trains can sometimes pass each other, and it increases the capacity of the railroad. Yeah, which brings me to just that I want to state that the railroad is actually fully functional. The semaphores are installed and it works. It probably won't handle a large amount of trains, but it handles a certain amount of trains. But it is also not built to accommodate long trains, so it will be up to a player to sort of build the railway infrastructure up. As in, it is there, but it's not really strong. There are also some trains running around the map. They don't really have purpose, but okay, I will need to find some. They don't really have purpose, but they are there to simulate the traffic. So they just go from one border to another. They look great, they feel great, but of course if the player wishes so, he can use them for some other things. The last thing that I want to mention in regards to railway, and it's a really small thing, but I'm really proud that it actually got in, is that on certain places, such as here, you will find these small houses next to train crossings. And why are they there? Well, it's a relic of a bygone era, because in the 1960s the barriers, they still would not be operated remotely. So in places that are not railway stations, you had to have railway employees living right next to the barriers, so they could just crank them down and up according to the timetable they were given. In railway stations, it doesn't need to be this way, because there would be some central controlling building, and the system of chains would just go and lower the barriers. It would work similarly to the junctions. So next in line are the roads. If you look at the map, you can see that the road network is pretty dense. I was lucky to have the military maps to serve as a basis for my map making, because it makes the road network be pretty close to reality. Basically, where it isn't, it's usually because the topography in the game does not allow me to have the road as it was, simply because the game won't allow such a slope to exist. There are 2 points of deviation from history. that I made willingly. The first is the issue of country roads. There is a lot of country roads on the map, but in reality there would be about 3 times more of them. I decided that it's not needed, that I will just do some of them. I mean, they are based in history, they go through places where they would be, but there would be much more in other places. But I thought there was no need to include them, because it would make the map extremely cluttered and it wouldn't really do much. The point of these roads is, of course, to reinforce the idea that the countryside, that the local countryside is being used by people, and that it is heavily used countryside, and therefore it of course needs roads to service the forests. The roads are used by agricultural machinery to service the fields, or by the people, to making some shortcuts in places where the regular roads wouldn't just cut it. So yeah, that's one point of deviation. The second change that I made is in regards to the types of roads. In 1960s, Czechoslovakia, pretty much all of these roads, in this region at least, would be asphalted. Instead, I used the gravel road a lot. I did it because it has a nicer texture in vanilla workers and resources, and also it allows me to differentiate important roads from unimportant ones. So if you see an asphalt road, then it's pretty often some important road that goes somewhere to some important place. Gravel is used pretty much everywhere, but in the real world it wouldn't be used as much. The road network is, of course, functional. It's very easy to make it functional, unlike the railroad. Most villages have bus stations that can be used from the get-go to service the village, provided, of course, that the player switches them on. There are some buses going round and round, just to again make it more lively place. And there's also, where suitable, the trucks are already provided. So there is, of course, the construction office in Okřížky, so it has all the machinery that it needs. Industries have their own car parks that will help them distribute the resources that they produce. There is a bus depot in Třebíč Borovina, which again can be used from the get-go. Player can use these buses, and yeah, that's it. I mean, there is also one more thing. I sort of didn't know how to solve the question of personal cars, because I didn't want to do like dealership everywhere. Firstly, because it activates the population even if it's closed, and secondly, it just looks strange in small villages. So I included some cars at the southern border. So there is a storage place that has a lot of personal cars, so if the player wishes so, he can just ship them to some dealership and then give them to the people to immediately have some personal car traffic. Yeah, so that's it for the gameplay. There are also gas stations spread throughout the map. They are not in historical places because, truth to be told, I just couldn't find where gas stations were at in 1960s. The same goes for bus stations. Bus stations are placed where they would make the most sense from the gameplay perspective, even though the bus station in real life would be elsewhere. There are, of course, exceptions, such as station at Přibyslavice, which is pretty much in its historical spot, but in most villages the bus stations are a work of fiction. Yeah. So, and now the historical fact, or just, I will comment the general look of roads. And the historical piece of trivia now will be connected to trees. If you look at most of the roads on the map, you will see that they are lined by trees. There is a tree line that goes along the road, and like a lot of things on this map, of course the roots of this very specific look lie in the Austrian Empire, this time in the 18th century, when Maria Theresia, the Empress, made it mandatory for all roads to have tree lines around them. Its aim was to increase the speed of armies moving through these roads, because the trees would allow them to march in a shade, and of course a lot of these trees would be fruit trees, so it would provide some refreshment for the soldiers. I of course used it also, and since the map were very detailed about the tree lines, maybe it had some military importance, but it was really detailed. So some roads have them, some roads don't have them. It's usually a very good way to tell a new road from an old one, because newer sometimes don't have the trees around them. But I think it just complements this sort of like a Czech look of this countryside, because even today, if you go to this region, you will see that most of the old roads still have quite large trees around them. So as regards electricity, there is nothing really to talk about, because on the map there was no power plant in 1960s that I know of, and even later the interesting everything interesting was happening elsewhere. I'm talking, of course, about construction of Dukovany nuclear power plant that happened just a few kilometers from the edge of the map, but on the map, nothing really to talk about. As far as existing infrastructure is concerned, in the 1960s, pretty much all the villages would have been connected to the power grid, short of some, some remote buildings. They could still be off the grid, but the villages would have been connected by then. I decided to include some power lines, but I took a functional approach, which means that I didn't really try to reconstruct historically the power lines. I mean, I have them, like, if I can, I lead them through places where they were historically, but I don't really care about, the grid in detail and in general. So if I took the historical approach, the lines would be much more complicated, and they wouldn't be just, simply going from A to B. They would diverge, and then they would join again, and the second reason why I didn't do it is that it's quite hard to find information about how. I just know that lines were there, but I can't really tell from the map what it means, what lines exactly. So I just took the functional approach to actually make it work. And the way it works is that from Mastník border there is a high voltage connection going to this power station near Červená hospoda, and this is the power stations. It was there by the 1960s. I suppose it was there even in the 30s, and it is definitely there still today. And from this power station, a lot of lines go all over the map. The station is divided into the left and right part. The left part is, with the exception of this line, it's providing power to this sort of starting location, most importantly to Okřížky, and then to Heraltice water treatment facility and the water source that is present around Troják region. So if you disconnect, if the player disconnects the right part, it's still possible to play on the left part. The right part then supplies energy to all of Třebíč, with the exception of the industrial area that is being supplied from elsewhere. So the purpose of the electricity is pretty much just to, again, make the start possible without investing in infrastructure. It should work, but it has a similar problem like the railway. It is there, but it's not a robust one, and it definitely won't support heavy industry simply because it's all being led through medium voltage wires. The last part of infrastructure to cover is water, both freshwater and sewage water. There are two cities on the map that have their plumbing done, and it's Třebíč and it's Okřížky. In Třebíč, as you can see, there is a lot of sewage tanks which lead to this discharge station in Jihlava River. It's a discharge station within the city bounds, which is unfortunate, but this is how it was done back then. There is no treatment plant because in 1960s there wasn't any. Well, there actually was, but not here. But there was a sewage treatment plant in this factory. However, sewage treatment plants are quite big in workers and resources, and it just wouldn't fit. So I just decided to represent it by linking Třebíč-Borovina district to this discharge station, because historically the treatment plant that was here had spare capacity, so this whole part of the Třebíč city was linked to it. I didn't include plumbing for the northern part of Třebíč, simply to still retain some objectives within the city. Now, as for fresh water, there is a big water tower. In reality, it's a beautiful part of 1920s, 1930s infrastructure. In the game, of course, this has to do. It's on a hill above Třebíč, so it produces a pretty good pressure to the water substations that are distributed around the city. Now, where does this get its water from? Well, nowadays there are three sources of fresh water for Třebíč. One is Vranov Dam, it's the main source. Then there is another dam which I forgot the name of, and lastly there are Heraltice forests. And Heraltice forests are also a source in the game, because in 1960s it was the sole source of fresh water, which was very near its capacity at the time, so they needed to find another sources, which they did. Now, what are Heraltice forests? Near Heraltice, this little village, there is a quite large forested area. Nowadays, about 2/3, 3/4 of all these trees are dead because there was an epidemic of parasites some 10-15 years ago. It hasn't still recovered, but at the time, in 1960s, it was pretty much the largest forest around. And it retained very high quality water, which was then pumped by a pipeline that went from these forests all the way to Třebíč. In the game, this is done also. I also included a water treatment plant in Heraltice, which purifies the water from these wells. Historically, there was no need for it, because the water from this forest was very good in its quality, and there was no need to treat it. However, in a game, these wells produce 93-94% of quality, which wouldn't do, so there is a free treatment plant provided in Heraltice. Also, like in reality, although there is a pipeline going to Třebíč, the villages along it are not connected to it, because they were not at the time. It was simply a pipeline built to supply Třebíč. I also use it to supply Okřížky, which I don't know whether it was done that way at the time, but it sort of works, and it again makes Okřížky a better starting city, since it's already solved in its infrastructure. And now, Okřížky I can also show one other thing on Okřížky. Most of the villages scattered around in this region would not have any central plumbing done in 1960s. It would be done either by sewage trucks, or by dumping sewage into little streams or small rivers that are around the villages. And I did the same on this map. I already talked in the topography section about how I included this rivers, small rivers or large streams, but I also decided to give them some purpose, and this resulted in big rivers, or like bigger, not all small rivers have them, but the bigger one have. I included piping, so some rivers, as you can see, like right here, these rivers, they have pipelines under them, so they can serve as a waste disposal unit. So Okřížky, you can see that Okřížky, they have a pond here, a pond here, and a pond here, and it all and from these three ponds there is this small river that flows to the south, and then it goes into Jihlava River. So underneath this river there is a pipeline that Okřížky are connected to, and on the map there is a lot of examples. So Brtnice again has this pipeline that goes all the way to Jihlava, and the villages along the way can just be connected to it and use it to dispose sewage water, and therefore it makes the disposal much easier, because you're not fixated just to Jihlava river itself. Apart from that, pretty much all the villages have built water substation and sewage tank. Again, nearly none of the villages are connected to any disposal or any water source, but they have these already built to make it easier to service them with vehicles. So yeah, that's it for the plumbing. Yeah, that's it for the plumbing.